Good evening, and welcome to another installment of The Wealthy Educator. I guess we can call it The Wealthy Educators tonight because I have a very, very special host with me tonight. My fabulous, beautiful, wonderful wife, Nirvana.
Hello, how are you?
You know, I'm doing all right. How you doing, baby?
I'm wonderful. I'm glad to be here.
Ready to rock and roll?
Absolutely.
Well, we have very special guests tonight. We have Kirsten and Julian Saunders with Rich and Regular. We are so excited to have them on our episode tonight. A fabulous couple out of Atlanta, Georgia, doing big things in the FIRE movement, and we really look forward to this dialogue tonight.
Absolutely.
Julian and Kirsten, how y'all doing tonight?
We're good. Happy to be here with y'all. We're going to turn this into a little double date night.
That's what's up. Double date night.
I like that.
I like the sound of that. So, you know what? One thing I notice about you all is that you appear to be very regular.
Yes, very extra regular is what I call it.
Extra regular. Like, they're like normal people, right?
Absolutely. I love the name. So can you tell us how you chose that name and tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah.
So the name, there are a lot of different versions of it. I'll give you the one I feel like telling today, which is really, I'll give you two versions because it was a couple of things tied together. But one day we were at a restaurant. We were just grabbing brunch, and we went to a restaurant called J. Christopher's, and it was like in our old home. It was about a mile away. We would go and grab lunch, and we were there, and we noticed that there was this other brother who was at the table with what looked like his mom or his aunt or something like that. And he just wanted to get some pancakes, but they didn't have like regular pancakes. They had buttermilk pancakes. They had ricotta lemon pancakes,
blueberry pancakes,
crunch cakes with oatmeal. And I honestly think he just got out, and he was just like, I just want some regular pancakes. And so it really just made the word.
But he was adamant. He didn't just say it one time. Like she would be like, okay, sir. And he was like, no, just regular pancakes.
Like,
and he sounded so frustrated.
So the reason why we thought about that is because like when we think about like just being rich and building wealth, a lot of people think of that more often than not in the most complex way possible or the most extreme way possible. And that's deliberate because that's what the media has presented to us, especially if you are talking about Black or being Black and building wealth. More often than not, the stories that are being told are stories that are on the deep, far extreme. And as a result, it makes it really difficult for everyday regular people to feel or believe as if those are things that they can actually achieve. And so what we wanted to present was a bit of an alternative, something that said, well, yeah, you can be rich. Now, you may not necessarily be, as rich as, some Diddy or, insert, famous athlete or entertainer. But you can certainly be like this kind of rich, right? That rich auntie, rich uncle that all of us kind of have. And that's what we felt was a really good stepping point and something that we wanted to help reintroduce back to the culture.
Yeah, Kirsten, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's Julian's point. It's a play on words. I think when I thought about what kind of rich I wanted to be, rich and famous wasn't appealing to me. Like I still want to be able to go to Target with no makeup on, without worrying about paparazzi or, worrying about my safety. I just wanted to be comfortable. I wanted different options at all of these intersections of life is what we call it. But like all of these different life milestones, I didn't want to have to go through an autopilot or default way of thinking. And so the rich that we're talking about is the rich to have, more than two options at any given challenge in life.
Great information. Now, you all paid off quite a bit of debt, and we all know that, lots of married couples are saddled with debt and they just can't get ahead. If you were sitting down talking to a newlywed couple and you were speaking with them about, debt freedom and financial freedom, what would you say?
I think it would start with a question, which is, what have you tried? So I always like to understand where couples stand with what they've already tried and whether they've written it off as not working because it didn't work fast enough or immediately versus whether it's a solid strategy that they just needed to give more time or, sit through their conflict and kind of work it out. And then I think the thing that usually we talk about the most is income mobility. So making sure that you're not just assuming that your income is fixed forever and that you are working on accelerating your income so that you can accelerate your timelines for debt payoff.
Gotcha. And speaking of marriage and money, Julian, you tell an interesting story about when you all first met, and I guess Kirsten charged a vacation on credit. And I guess you felt a little misled. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So the story goes that, we met starting our jobs on the same team on the same day. Sparks flew. And we were like, you know what, let's just take it to the next level. We're going to go take this trip. And at the time, we were traveling a lot on business. And so for us, and working for a hotel company. And so the fact that we could travel and go somewhere fancy was not that big of a deal to me. So I was like, you know what, let's go. So we ended up booking a trip to Panama. And when we got back from Panama, I was ready to jump right back into my standard approach of, all right, we just took a vacation. It's time to get back to the basics. And, let's just sort of try to undo the damage that we did while we were on vacation, balling out, And she came back and actually wanted to celebrate having taken a vacation. And that was the first, I couldn't wrap my head around
I wanted to extend the life of the vacation.
She wanted to go ahead and keep the party going. And I was like, yeah, nah, it's time to get back to work and, eating in and, And so all of that led to a big argument. And at the apex of that argument, I told her that if I'd known that she had credit card debt, I would not have dated her. And I obviously regret having saying that. I'm glad that we overcame that conversation. But what that confrontation did was it shined a light on my beliefs about money and debt, where I stood at the time. And it really forced me to go back and think about why I felt so adamantly about it. And it caused her to do the same thing, why she felt so loose with being in debt and continuing to be in debt, and why she didn't have a problem with it. And so in the process of our conflict, we did a lot of deep digging and learning about ourselves, learning about our culture and our family and our upbringing, and how all of those things sort of shape the way that we think about money. And we healed, we got back together. We've since been married and everything is great. And now it's like, all right, well, how do we help other people who might be reluctant to do some of that dirty work, which is to go back and think about why you think the way that you are, or why you're so dismissive of debt and the role that it plays in your life, or why you may be in a position like we were in, where you were earning good money, but you don't quite understand the potential of the opportunity or the moment that you're in. Mm-hmm. And so that all led to us launching the blog and some of the other things that have stemmed from that ever since.
Well, I wanted to follow up on what he just said about their different upbringings with money. So clearly you had a serious issue with her having credit card debt. And what led to that? Like what in your upbringing led to you being so offended by the fact that she had so much debt? And Kirsten, how was your upbringing? Like, why was it no big deal for you? I know clearly you're a free spirit, as is my wife.
Free spirits unite.
Free spirits unite. Nerds unite. But yeah, why don't you both, if you can just elaborate a little bit about the differences that you have had and how your upbringing led to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in short, I grew up broke. I grew up super poor. I grew up in 1980s Brooklyn. I didn't know at the time it was called the crack era. You didn't know it. It was just the 80s. I didn't know what it was. But those were the things that I saw and experienced in New York at that time was just normal. I grew up, I guess you could say, in a single parent house. My father was around, but I didn't see him every single day. He was influential in my life, but he wasn't there like that. And I just grew up poor. My mom always worked multiple jobs. I always worked multiple jobs. I've been working ever since I was 16. And so for me, coming to Atlanta, I moved to Atlanta like a bunch of other New Yorkers did shortly before the Olympics, or right around the time of the Olympics in '96. And that was really the first time that I started to see like Black wealth or even just like Black middle class, because like I didn't really know what that looked like, and what her sort of, or what that experience made me think of were just almost like people who just didn't get it, people that just didn't understand like just how tough life could be. And it was almost like disrespectful in my mind and in my heart. And so I felt like, wow, like this woman just doesn't understand me. And if this is how reckless she can be with her own stuff, imagine how reckless she can be. Like, I'm just piling all this stuff on, you know what I mean?
Projecting.
Yeah, projecting. So yeah, I think they call it scarcity mindset, you know what I mean? And it doesn't just influence the way you see the world, or even just, let's say, the powers that might be working against you. It impacts how you engage with the people that you build within your life.
Yeah, and my upbringing was basically the opposite. I grew up in a 2-parent middle class home in Atlanta in the 80s. So I was there when, the prime of Black mayorship, and was around Black people and belonged to a community and to a church. I was at church several times a week. And so I was introduced very early to concepts like faith and abundance. And without the experience and maturity of like seeing those and play, my mind meant that I translated like abundance into, well, there's always more where that came from. And so it affected my money mindset, because I just made it seem like not only was life abundant, money was abundant too. And so if I spent it, it would come back, and I had faith, and I would default to a bunch of religious platitudes whenever he would ask me questions about it. And I wasn't actually addressing the problem. I had just like written it off. And I was also very good at making money. I also have been working since I was 15. I had an entrepreneurial spirit, and I just never worried about there not being enough, because that hadn't been my experience. And so I always told myself, eventually I'll pay the credit card bill off when I feel like it. I never had like this virtue assignment to debt. It just felt like that's what it's there for. And I'll always be making money, so I'll always be able to pay it off.
Yeah, the way I think about it is she grew up in the Cosby Show, and I grew up in Good Time. Yes, it was just different, you know.
It's very different.
Yeah, like or another example is like she grew up with like, money being, leaves on the ground in the fall. They're just it's just everywhere. Money literally grew on trees. It's just on the floor.
We were not that well off.
I'm saying in my mind, and I grew up the complete opposite, where like money might as well have been a leprechaun. Like, it's somewhere.
Yeah.
I've seen it, over there in Manhattan, but it wasn't something that I'd ever seen up close. And to me, like it was scarce.
It's amazing.
You spoke earlier about your blog and other ventures. Can you tell us a little bit about Money on the Table and how that came to be?
Yes.
Money on the Table might be my favorite project right now. So Money on the Table is a video series that we started in the middle of the pandemic. The idea actually came to us long before that. And basically, it is our attempt to blend our love for like food and wine with finance, right? And so, but there's also like a cultural element to it as well. And what I mean by that is a lot of the conversations, or the tough or real conversations that people have about money, tend to be had at the dinner table. Those are the conversations that you're having with your partner. Like, look, we need to go over this budget, or even if it's celebratory news, like, hey, honey, I got the raise. These are the conversations that people are typically having at the dinner table. And so because in a past life, I was a professional chef, we had the idea, was like, well, what if we just did a series and really like took it to the next level and made it look and feel like food TV, but like on the side, you're actually learning these little mini lessons about money or wealth building or whatever the financial topic is. And so it's been really, really great. We like I said, we shot that we didn't intend to shoot what we shot, but because of the pandemic, that's what you got. Because,
that rhymed.
That's what I do. I just got bars. But yeah, we will fulfill the original vision in this upcoming season,
Yeah.
which we're really, really excited about. But yeah, it's been great. And I think the response has been really, really cool. More than anything, because it has done what we want our business as a whole to do, which is to inspire better conversations about money. And I think you do that by like making it less boring, less filled with shame, and in some cases, focusing less on being educational as if I'm trying to lecture you, and more insightful. You know what I mean? And so if you focus on entertaining people, we've learned that actually tends to be far more impactful than leading with, hey, let me teach you something. It's like, hey, actually, let me show you how to make shrimp and grits. And while I'm showing you how to make shrimp and grits, I might throw in a couple lessons about finance. And so it certainly makes it more fun to us, for us to do, than to constantly sign up for lectures.
Right. So like in your first episode, you talked about money and how it's kind of taboo to talk about it in the Black community. So can you just kind of elaborate about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about in that episode, I think Black people think they are talking about money, but because we're using coded language, we don't have the same understanding of what's good money, what's bad money.
I don't know how much
what's
money you make.
Doing all right.
I make good money.
Right.
So how much is that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it all varies, again, depending on where you live, what responsibilities you have, how big your family is. All that stuff is a variable. And so I think what we were trying to do was just talk about the benefits, the other side of talking about money more specifically and more concretely, what it can do for our community if we're just willing to be a little more vulnerable and share, even if it's not dollar amounts, kind of what you're going through. If you're having a hard time saving for retirement, talking about why you're having a hard time saving for retirement, or talk about why you're having a hard time, covering an emergency or dealing with an unexpected job loss. All of those things can only help us get better financial literacy and be better stewards of the money that we receive.
Absolutely. I agree. It's super taboo. So either you're broke and you don't make enough and you're scared to talk about money, or you make too much and you're doing successful and then you think everybody else is going to hate on you for being successful. When, really all you want to do, like me, I believe in lifting as I climb. Like that's my motto. And, I think the more people that are prosperous, the better it is for society as a whole. So, I just think that we need to have those conversations. We can't be scared to have those conversations about money, because obviously the more people doing better, in my opinion, we do better as a whole.
I also think it's important because that's how we learn.
Yes.
And historically, that's how we've learned. You know what I mean? Not to turn this into a lesson on Black history, but, you talk about the power of oral tradition, or, these stories, these start with stories. You know what I mean? I think, especially those of us that are in the personal finance and media space, I think we're really fooling ourselves if we think that people are learning their first lessons from books or courses. You've been learning about money from the moment you were born. You know what I mean? It's those little sayings that your grandmama used
Money
to tell
don't grow
you.
on trees.
It's all the little things that you saw and or didn't see. It's the people that were the haves versus the have-nots, and who you might have necessarily identified with, that helped shape your ambitions and your career trajectory, or where you believe that you wanted to go to school, or how you think you needed to dress in order to feel a certain way, or how much you thought was big money, because that's what you saw. You know what I mean? And so what's really happening is when people start to reach a point in their lives where they are learning about money, they're actually unlearning about money, and really, I guess, learning sort of new terminology or new vehicles and that sort of thing. But the point is, the vast majority of people learn about money through everyday conversation.
100%.
You know what I mean? You go to the barbershop, somebody mentions something, and then you go home and you look into it. You go to the hair salon, somebody said something and they said, and you was like, what? You went home and you looked into it. Not, I signed up for a seminar and I'm going to, and then that's all of a sudden your first lessons. We learn indirectly and indirectly. And most of those initial lessons are indirect and woven through cultural and social norms.
Those are some great points. And, just to be transparent, I'm a school administrator. My wife is a teacher. But one of my side hustles is as a realtor. And, I'm always putting stuff out there. I talk about finances all the time. I talk about real estate all the time. And I have people hit me up all the time like I'm a financial advisor. And last year I had one of my former students hit me up about real estate and just asked me some questions. I gave him some pointers. And today I saw on Instagram, he posted a check, a copy of a check, $127,000 check from a deal he made as a wholesaler. I was like, man, I couldn't believe it. And he's like 22 years old. I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. And I had a little bit to do with it just by giving him some advice in the past. But whatever advice I gave him, I didn't do myself. Otherwise, I have $127,000 check. But yeah, I mean, you have to have those conversations. And, I think just being transparent with people, if we can take the taboo out of it and have that dialogue with people and be supportive, I think we'll have more people that are able to be comfortable and tell their story and listen to your story and implement whatever plans you may have in place and be prosperous. It doesn't hurt. It don't hurt me to have, my neighbor be prosperous. I think it's only good for the whole group. So
absolutely.
In the second episode, you mentioned corporate racism and how it really motivated you to get out of the rat race a lot sooner. And I found it to be very interesting. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. I am low-key grateful for racism.
No.
Because what I mean...
No.
let me finish. What I mean by that is if it weren't for those experiences, I don't know that I would have found the motivation to believe in myself when I did. Because everything was fine. I was comfortable. I was comfortable wearing my good old shiny golden handcuffs. Great job, great benefits, a good bit of flexibility. And I had every intention of just riding that thing on out. But I have a deep passion for wanting to see my community rise. And there were so many things, like even just before 2020 that had happened that I realized that I was just taking and absorbing. And it really wasn't until my son was born in 2017 when I started to think about the lessons that he would be learning indirectly from me. And in particular, this notion that so many of us come home and we complain about hating our jobs and we complain about like not having enough money. But that's pretty much, we just end up stuck in that cycle. I hate our job, but I don't really have any other options. So I wake up the next week and I continue to do the same things. And then it just piles up, the disappointment, the frustration, and in some cases, the racism. And the way that I experienced it was traumatic. I mean, it was a former boss who was trying to get me fired by saying that I made some white female colleagues uncomfortable, which is laughable. And I mean, I say laughable, like I can laugh about it now, you know what I mean? But at the time I was horrified. But I think what was most profound for me through that entire experience was that the woman who was trying to sort of pin this thing on me reported to a Black man, and that Black man had to sign off on that accusation in order for this paperwork to be filed. And that person was someone that I actually, had a relationship with, someone that I would have thought I could have had over at the house and cooked out and had a good time with, someone who wanted to build a relationship very similar to us building this relationship with you and your wife, with me and Kirsten, someone that she knows, you know what I mean? And what that taught me was that there are people like us that look like us, who even in the face of what that taught me was that there are certain things that people are willing to do for money and certain things that people are willing to accept for money. If he had done the right thing, which is to just dig deeper and say, hey, you sure this is Julian we're talking about? He would have uncovered the truth and we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. But he didn't do that. And part of the reason why he didn't do that is because of corporate culture, because of what was at stake for him, meaning he was in a really high position. And, anytime you stir the pot or speak your truths, oftentimes you end up running the risk of putting your livelihood at stake. And he simply wasn't willing to do that. And I actually understand that. You know what I mean? Why he wouldn't want to do that. Because it was and is, to a great extent, acceptable for people like me to just go ahead and bend the knee. Just go ahead and accept this thing, these accusations, and just do all this stuff. So long story short, as I look back on that situation, I'm grateful because it forced me to reckon with all of the negative energy that I was bringing home, all of the negative energy that I would then be passing on to my son, and therefore starting to shape what he deemed as acceptable behavior in exchange for a paycheck. And instead, what I did was I stuck to my guns and my beliefs. I removed myself from that situation. I empowered myself, built a business that is now thriving. And the best part was about 2 years after that incident, my phone rang. That brother called me after he'd quit and confessed that it was one of the worst decisions that he'd ever made in his life, because after I left, one, it led to a literal domino effect. Everyone else on the team left. Two, he was then forced to work with the woman who made the false accusation of me, saw her for who she was, and said it was one of the worst experiences that he'd ever had. But he regretted that immensely.
And this was after the reckonings. This was after
Correct.
the pandemic started. This was after George Floyd. And he had just had time. He had been himself affected by racism and had been furloughed. Like a lot of stuff went down. And I think he just had the realization, like, oh, there's a word for this. I think Black people are so used to oppression that we normalize it and we internalize it. And it's not until you can step out of that environment and you're looking at it and you're starting to tally up your experience and you're like, wait a minute, now my pay ain't changed. I've applied for positions. I'm seeing them bring in people from the outside that are less qualified. I'm not getting promoted. I don't get the visibility I need to even develop myself career-wise. And you start to say, what's the word for that? Like, it's not self-improvement. It's not me. It's not a skills gap. The word is systemic racism. Like, it's institutionalized racism. That the reason for that is because of your Blackness. And as hard as that is to admit, there are a lot more Black professionals, especially the ones that have done really well, that are willing to do that. And he was one of them, thankfully.
Wow. And I'm thinking about, I'm trying to put myself in his shoes, like as a school administrator. If I have a false accusation against a teacher or something, obviously I can't just sign off on it. I have to do an investigation.
But you wouldn't have seen it as a false accusation. You would have seen it as this person is being accused of something. And, who am I to question it? Who am I to sort of break the process? You would have just believed that there's a system in place to solve for these types of things. But I believe, because of the relationship that we had, and he believed that after the fact, that what he should have done is thought twice. Like, who are you going to trust? The person that you've known for 9 years? Or the person who had just started in the role, had a reputation for being dramatic, and was just floundering in their job. You know what I mean? So what she was ultimately trying to do was throw me under the bus so that she could, blame all of the mistakes and shortcomings on the team, basically sort of pin that on me. And she basically put a lot of dip on that chip to try to, ensure that this little write-up was going to be something that led to immediate exit. And I just had a little. I have way too much pride. I work in the same building with this woman. You know what I mean? Like, imagine that. Like, we worked in the same building. I'm going to sign off on your attempt to write me up that I was aggressive towards other women in the same workplace that my wife works in. Like, that's ridiculous. First of all, not to say that it's impossible, but it was absolutely ridiculous. And long story short, he apologized, and we're healing from it.
let's say he would have discovered fire, right? And he could have done the right thing without worrying about his job. And he could have treated a brother with humility as opposed to just throwing you under the bus because he needed to protect his neck, you know?
Shout out to give you some more detail. This man was one of our biggest fans.
He knew about fire,
He knew
and
all about it.
He knew about Rich and Regular.
He knew all of it. But that's how deep this
and
is,
internalized,
right? Because when you've worked so hard to get to where you are, you believe that, hey, you're right there with me. Let's just go ahead and take this thing on the chin. It's okay. People have done it before. You won't be the first. You won't be the last. Just take it and you'll bounce back because there's something bigger. And I was like, yeah, actually, you're missing the point. I'm not willing to do that for this money. There's lots of things that I can do for money. And if you have been reading my blog, you see that I don't, just like we wrote. It's like, I don't have FU money yet, but I don't know how to deal with this bleak money. And I didn't, and he was shocked. He couldn't believe that I would actually walk away from all this money. I was like, yeah, because I believe I can create that money on my own. And that's exactly what we've done. And so and we've not really shared this story because I don't think a lot of people are ready for it. And to be honest, like I've been hesitant, you know what I mean? That's how deep it is because I don't want to shame him.
Yeah.
But I also recognize that there are plenty of people like him in positions of power everywhere that in some ways internalize that power and misdirect it and perpetuate this notion that we have to continue to work twice as hard for half as much.
Yes.
And so part of our message is not just about understanding the math and financial literacy. It's about this power dynamic between employees and employers, and also helping our community reprioritize what's most important to them from their legacy, from their integrity, from their independence, from their family. Like, don't tell me you put family first if you're willing to accept something like that. Because like my son might read that, you know what I mean? And anyway, I was not willing to accept that. And, we are where we are, and I'm grateful, like I said, that happened because absolutely without it, I don't know that I would have that it would have been the catalyst for my departure. And as a result, the beginnings of this new chapter that we're in.
Same.
Well, he's mentioned the FU money, and just whoever's watching this, go back to my interview with J.L. Collins to see exactly what he's talking about. FU money. Go look it up.
So you also talk about parents and aging parents and raising children. And, there's this thing called the sandwich generation. So would you mind elaborating on your views about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes our generation unique is that we are dealing with a retirement crisis from our parents. So a lot of older Americans can't afford to retire and rely on their working children to help support them, as well as having children of our own that are still dependent on us for support. And so the name for that, what they've labeled that is called the sandwich generation, meaning you're stuck in between two generations supporting them while also trying to build a future for yourself. And it is an incredibly challenging concept. It is one that requires you to, like they say in corporate, build the plane while you're flying it, like figure out how to make sure that everybody's taken care of in the short term, but be able to think long term to make sure that, generationally, your children don't have to do the same thing for you so that your children don't grow up to have to support you the same way that you're supporting your parents. And so we're learning as we're going. I wish I could have a conclusive tip for everybody that's watching and say, this is what you do to get out of the sandwich. But the reality is, like, it is what it is. We are figuring out how to live in the sandwich. We're figuring out how to allocate funds and investments for the short term and for the long term, and learning as we go. But it's very challenging, and it's real. And it's something that we need to start talking about, because a lot of people are just kind of ignoring it, not realizing that as time passes by, as decades pass by, not only does the data suggest that we all become less employable. So this idea that we're going to work until we're 55, 60, 65, like that's going out of the window because boomers are not leaving at the rate that they should be.
They can't afford it.
Because they can't afford to. And that, that the options that were available to boomers will be available to us. Those are two realities that the data suggests just we need to deal with, especially people of color. And so it's a topic that we're very passionate about and that we live with it right now.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So I remember some friends having babies in middle school and we were like, oh, your life is over. And now they're like living their best life on Facebook. They're 39 years old. Their kids are out the house and we're all like, oh,
right.
We got a second grader. So they did it the right way. So speaking of...
It's always interesting when I see my friends that have, 18-year-olds.
I was about to say, especially now coming out of graduation season, it's like, what?
Yeah.
we the same age. Why do we have a 4-year-old we're trying to fight to go to bed?
Right.
You have a graduate.
College student.
Yeah.
It's really funny to me. So speaking of having a child, how has Bo changed your life? Like how has he changed, financially speaking, obviously, but how has he changed your fire projection and your numbers?
Ooh. So it's a two-part question. He's changed our life because he's made it a lot easier to broach some of these subjects with our parents. Honestly, like part of what he brings to the table is that, we can give very real examples of the trade-offs that we have to make when we're considering what we can help with and what we can't. As far as numbers, it's TBD. Like he is a variable, and we're just now at the point in his life where we have to make decisions about his education. Do we want to put him in the public school system, or do we want to do something a little more private or unique based on our lifestyle? And all of that affects the numbers. All of that affects how much we need each month in terms of cash flow to make it. And we're figuring it out. But up until this point, he hasn't really. I mean, we've been able to subsidy his expenses afford. That's the right word.
Yeah, it's not. We're really fortunate in that. This year will probably be the year where we get back to what our old salaries were. We may, through our business, we may end up actually exceeding that. Which is really, really great. And so, going back to what you were saying before about like, how do we deal with that? I mean, the one tip really is to just focus on income. And you mentioned that at the top of the conversation, but like that has been the biggest shift for us. And one that I think is a little different from, I would say, the majority of people in the fire space is that we don't focus nearly as obsessively about budgeting. We obsess over revenue and income, you know what I mean? Because the reality is like you can only save so much before your quality of life or sense of security is impacted, particularly if you are a member of the sandwich generation. And we're at this point now where we have essentially, we're now financially supporting, like we've always kind of financially supported my mom, but now it's a monthly thing, And so for us, like that is the biggest focus. And Bo is really no different in that sense. So by focusing on income, by making sure that we've got plenty of money to make sure that he's got, what he needs for his medical needs and educational needs, and that my mom has what she needs to be comfortable in her golden years, and that we have enough to live a quality lifestyle and to still hit our investment objectives. That's been the key. And yeah, in terms of like timelines, we've essentially stopped paying attention to them because it doesn't really, you're not in control. You know what I mean? If the more that you understand the way the markets work, like you're not in control. You're like, what are you going to do if things correct 2 months before, you're slated to hit your particular FI number? Are you going to feel that much more insecure about where you are? If you spent 10 years getting to that point, let's say your number was $1 million, you get to 900,000, the market tanks, it drops to 700,000, but you've spent 7 years building that muscle, building those routines, saving and investing. You shouldn't feel insecure at that point. You should actually feel quite good about where you are and know that, hey, just as quickly and as easily, and I feel like I'm channeling JL here, just as quickly and as easily as the tide can come in, it can go right back out.
Yeah.
And I think the key is to not just be mindful of that, but also make sure that you don't give yourself so much credit for the gains, because you had very little to do with the gain. You know what I mean? And so so if you don't give yourself credit for the gains, then you should also not give yourself,
don't beat yourself up.
Beat yourself up for not hitting an arbitrary speculative date and or number.
And at the end of the day, like 700,000 is still a lot of money. Like you can still live a whole lot of years without running out
and in
a
whole
money.
lot of places.
And in a whole lot of places.
And help a whole lot of people.
And I wish that was a bigger part of the FIRE conversation. Like we seem so out of touch when we talk about the specific amount of money needed to never, ever earn another dollar in life, because that describes literally no one's life. Like there's not a single person in the FIRE community who is not earning any money through any means whatsoever. Like everybody has dividends or interest or passive income or rental income. Like it's coming in somewhere. And this idea that like you have to hit this very specific formulaic number that's based on averages and all things constant is, to me, like some sort of perfectionist fantasy. Like it is meant to be a guidepost. It's meant to be like, you know, it's kind of like a target weight, like a BMI, but it's not the thing that that you have to like rest your laurels on and not consider yourself financially independent until you get there. And I think we're seeing that with like a lot of the sort of versions of FI that are coming out now, from Coast FI to Barista FI, Lean FI. All of those variations are people's attempts to take their power back, to say, you know what, if I've saved up enough for my traditional retirement, meaning, you know, from 60 to 90 years old, that money is sitting in a bank and compounding, then I consider myself financially independent, because I trust that for the next 20 years, I can figure out how to not, how to not lose everything. Like that should be allowed. It should be allowed for each person to define their definition, their version of financial independence.
You drop some fire right there. I mean,
right.
that's some great information. And it's interesting, right? Because like I said, we're educators, and I can actually retire and get my full pension at 53, which is about 12 years from now. I actually have the date, like December 15th, 2033. Like I already know, because I want that monthly check for the rest of my life. But, so I'm not necessarily FIRE, I'm going to be FI. But if you look at the context, right, like nationwide, that still is FIRE, because most people are working till they're 65 and 70. Then you got people like Susie Orman who are encouraging people to work that long.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reason I started the channel is because I was seeing educators who, they love what they do. They love the kids. They're pouring their heart and soul into the kids, and they do it for 40, 50 years. And I'm like, oh, they doing it because they love what they do, which they do. But a lot of time they're doing it because they have to.
Right.
I'm like, there is no way in hell that an educator should be working for 50 years. I just don't. Right. I think we need to take better care of them. And and a lot of the time they only know what they know. They know what they see growing up. So if you like spend more than you make, it don't matter if you got a $30,000 a year job or a $100,000 a year job. So, and that's what we're here for. But just to educate people on whether it's FI or FIRE, give people, and I think the most important part of FIRE and FI is having options. Being able to just, the most important day of my financial life was the day that we found out we were debt free. I walked into work that day and I decided, hey, I'm not working for Chase anymore. I'm working for Nirvana and the kids and myself. So it's important that we have those conversations and that we talk about financial freedom.
Yeah. And I think, one of the benefits of the pandemic is that a lot of people got a chance to feel what that feels like when they paused student loan payments, and when there were certain, moratoriums on rent and eviction, and you got stimulus checks and unemployment benefits. Like a lot of people, for the first time in their lives, felt what it felt like to have excess. And then you couple that with the fact that you couldn't spend your money the way that you normally did. Some of our, favorite luxuries weren't available to us because of quarantine. It was the first time people kind of tried it for a second, where it's like, wow, like this is what it's like to have more money at the end of your month instead of the other way around, to have extra. And I think that sparked a new interest in financial independence, because you can figure out, if the unemployment benefit was an extra $300, you can figure out how to make $300 going forward. Like if you felt what that felt like in your life, what that little cushion felt like, there's a number of ways, infinite ways to make $300 passively now that there weren't maybe 10 years ago, or even, 5 years ago when we first started talking about FI. And so I think this is like what do they call them? Like watershed moments where people are now at a crossroads where they get to decide, how do you want to go back into normal? And now that people have tried, this life where you don't have to do everything, you don't have to spend every dime, you can live on less, I think we'll see a lot more people interested in the concept.
Agreed.
So you all have been featured like in Bloomberg, CNBC, Essence Magazine, and you're getting a lot of everywhere, right? Like many places. So how do you stay grounded with all the success and attention that you guys are getting?
That's a great question. I'm going to be honest. I don't know. All I know is my life. And I think, that helps. But I think I will say one of the things that certainly helped to keep us grounded is that we have real relationships with the community, with the people in the community that we've built. We are not, like, you send me a DM, I'm going to respond.
Yeah.
You send me an email, and even if it goes back and forth, I'm going to respond. Like, where I'm not so removed from these from what regular people or most people, I should say, are experiencing, that I let those things get to my head. And the reality is, like, it matters to me to your point about lifting as we climb. It matters to me. Like, we've been in some very exclusive spaces, and it's just as lonely as it was when we were, at the peak of our corporate careers. And so for us, it's way more valuable and important, even if it slows down our path, to leave a trail of breadcrumbs to make sure that people know how to get there. Or even if they decide that, all right, well, that's where, that trail leads, I'm going to pick my own trail, but so that they know it's possible to get there. And so, I think it helps just to have very real relationships, and also not to take it so seriously. I mean, I understand why people see those things and react the way that they do, because I've been there. But now that we're here, I can tell you that, when you're there, I don't know. It's just, honestly, it means more to me to be on your podcast than it did being featured in Bloomberg.
Oh man, I appreciate that. That really means.
No, I'm not blowing smoke.
No, it's not. It's real.
I genuinely mean that.
Yeah.
You're actually asking me real questions. The exchange and this is no disrespect to the reporter. Like, she was phenomenal.
She's doing a job. You know what I mean?
Actually, one of the best journalists that we've ever worked with. But she's just doing her job. Let's be honest, she's not catering to my audience, the people that I want to touch. The people that I know, when I go get my hair cut next week, they're not reading Bloomberg. And respectfully, they're not reading Success. You know what I mean? As proud as we are that partnership, they're just not reading that. You know what I mean? Tony Robbins on the cover, they're not reading that. You know what I mean? So it means more to me. I don't know how large your audience is. I don't care. But I know whoever listens to it, the likelihood that I'm going to impact a life because I know that somebody is looking at me, listening to me, and realizing that dude sounds just like me. Or if they see a picture, they're going to say, that dude looks just like me, or she reminds me of my cousin. That has way more power than us being featured in some big media or something like that. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I agree. So we see people like, obviously Our Rich Journey and you all and Black Married and Debt Free and His and Her Money, who they interviewed us last month, and they told us about FinCon, and you're going to be big idea presenters at FinCon. So when they told us, they were like, hey, make sure you sign up for FinCon. It's in Austin, which is about 2 hours from us. So I said, it's
y'all gotta come.
Yeah, we have to come, especially now that y'all gonna be there. I mean,
right.
So tell us about how you got the gig to be big idea presenters.
That's a great question. I don't know. Actually, we do know. They asked.
They
So
asked.
they asked the FinCon community, and they have like an advisory board of super engaged people who have attended over the years. They asked, who do you want to hear from? And I think people specifically said us because of the approach that we've taken to financial education and influence. To Julian's point, a lot of our stuff is unscripted. It's kind of like a fly on the wall. Here's what it sounds like when you're, stumbling through a conversation with your spouse or with your parents about a financial topic. And I think people appreciate seeing something modeled out, getting specific about, here's how it can go. Like there are uncomfortable moments in almost all of the content that we produce, but that doesn't mean that, it was unsuccessful. I think part of our point is that financial literacy is like this ongoing thing. It's not a destination. It's something that you just kind of do, and you have a relationship very similar to reading. When you look at words, when you look at letters, you're reading them. Like you don't think like, oh, I'm reading. It just kind of happens because you've engaged with letters since you were little. The same should be true with finances and money. Like when you develop a relationship with it, you can have a casual conversation, a formal conversation, a flippant conversation, a quick pass by conversation. That's the way that it should be integrated into your life. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah. And everybody, like people, they look at you and like you said, you look regular and you look like everyday people that we know. And when you hear, so it's like as in education, when we have the opportunity, if we can hire individuals that look like the students, that can relate to the students, we take, we take advantage of that, because, and that's not to say that people that don't look like the students can't educate them, because clearly we have some of our best teachers, don't look like the students. But when you have the opportunity, it's been proven that if you have African-American males on the campus at an elementary school, that the performance of the students, rises. So just the fact that people see you and you're hip and you're young and you look like them, I mean, they're going to flock to you. So I could see why they chose you as FinCon presenters, and we will definitely be there.
Yes, we will.
So let me tell you one thing we really struggle with, my wife and I, going to the grocery store and spending a few $100s and going grocery shopping and then eating out the rest of the week. Yeah, going out to eat the rest of the week. So I'm like, so I see your unrealistic kitchen and it's always clean. Like, how do y'all manage? How do you manage meal prep and keeping a clean kitchen and all these good things? Like, what kind of advice would you give? Because we're not the only ones that go through this. To be honest with you, like people waste so much money on groceries, and it's so like frustrating and sinful to me. I hate it.
Yeah, so you're actually forcing me to pitch something here. So we wrote an ebook called Eat Better on a Budget. I want to say in 2019, and it's available for sale, but it is aimed at people that kind of have that struggle. And what it was me kind of reaching back into my career. I used to be in my former career as a professional chef, and kind of leaning into all of the tips and things that I've learned to help go through that process. And I'll just off the top of my head, I'm trying to think. One of the things part of the reason why I think people do that, go buy a bunch of groceries and then never use it, is because you just don't enjoy cooking, right? If you enjoyed cooking, it wouldn't feel like you would be much more inclined to do it. You know what I mean? Well, cleaning, but learning. So in the book, we talk about that too, right? The idea of cleaning as you cook, so that it doesn't always feel like cleaning is like this, like it's like you don't play the game all 48 minutes and it's like not a game and went into overtime. It's like, man, you know what I mean? I'm so tired. Yeah, it's double overtime. It's like never ending. But yeah, there's a lot of little things there. So one is cleaning as you go. Two is actually learning to improve your cooking skills, like your fundamental cooking skills, so that you actually enjoy the process of cooking and arguably cook cleaner. so that you don't make a mess that needs to be cleaned up, which means, that, and that's everything from getting the right pans to knife skills.
To getting rid of a lot of
to
stuff.
getting rid of a lot of things.
A lot
That
of
was
people
the
have
third
too
thing that I was
many-
going to say, is that most people have way too much stuff and way too much clutter, which just adds to the overwhelm. And part of it is because we don't like to throw things away. You know what I mean? Because if it still has use, it's there's no technical reason to throw away an aluminum spoon. It's not unless it's melted, you know what I mean? But when you got 4 or 5 of them, you don't need
You're
all
going to
those
use
spoons.
4 or 5 of them.
You don't need all those
Instead of rinsing
pots,
off the one that you got.
all those mismatched lids. You don't need, we got 6 mugs, coffee mugs, you know what I mean? And so it's a combination of managing inventory, if not just actual product that you buy, but also the supplies that you purchase. And one of the first things in the book that we talk about is purging. Even in the pandemic, we were telling people that were being forced to cook, that were uncomfortable doing it, is this might seem counterintuitive, but first things first is go in your kitchen and throw away all the stuff that you just don't need.
Yeah, and including them appliances. Part of the challenge is that people use 3 or 4 appliances to make something like salsa. And it's you could have just used one knife and one food processor. But instead, it's no, I got the garlic chop, I got the onion chop, I got the knife, I got the special board that I have the garlic peeler. And so it's your stuff is creating the mess and forced function. If you limit the amount of things that you have and go back to the fundamentals, you eventually just gonna rinse the things off, and it's much easier to clean as you go because it's not a pile.
Yeah, the better you can use a knife, the less need you'll have for probably 30-40% of the tools that are out there. And then secondly, once you have really good pans, nobody needs the giant 20-piece set. Nobody.
Yeah.
You only got 4 burners, and very few people that I know are comfortable having more than 2 things burning at the same time.
Yeah, nobody.
Unless one of them is a pot of greens and another one is some pasta water or something like that. It's too much. People get confused. So you definitely don't need the 15, 20, 30 piece you don't need all that stuff. So yeah, it's learning how to cook, mastering the fundamentals, getting rid of the clutter, and then learning how to clean as you cook. And I think that just helps make the kitchen run more efficiently. And then you start to see that impact into the budget, because it's wow, you get to really say wow, we bought groceries for $200, and we were able to make 4 or 5 different things out of it. And we used every little bit of it. There's no leftover waste. It's building up clutter, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the last thing I want to bring up, we are actually wrestling with the idea of getting a rental property. And I think you have 1 or 2 rental properties. Would you recommend somebody to jump into the life of being a landlord?
No. I wouldn't. But that's only because I know what it feels like to earn income in a multitude of ways. And I've always said, we actually don't have those properties anymore. We sold them.
Yeah.
We sold the last one in 2020. But if you've ever earned $1 on the internet, it hit different than a rent check. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have to deal with nearly as many of the insurance issues. And I'm not even talking about people talk about getting
the
a phone
2
call.
a.m. phone call.
I've never received that call because they had a management company who would take all those calls. But I'm talking about just growth potential. You know what I mean? And so I would say if somebody is looking to build wealth, that they really should be looking in tech. Look into the tech space, whether it's starting a blog, starting a website, or using a platform or a brand that you have, like a podcast, getting a sponsorship, growing your audience, using that growth to warrant bigger sponsorships, and so on and so on. I found those to be far more scalable and a lot less risky than becoming a landlord, particularly now, given the state of the real estate market. It's probably really, really hard to find a deal because you're competing with really, really hungry buyers.
No, you're competing with hedge funds.
Really cash-strapped investors and hedge funds. Right.
Yeah.
So you're competing with Berkshire Hathaway and, other institutional big investors. Whereas with a blog or a podcast, you're competing with yourself.
And I would honestly say you don't have to build one. You can acquire one, right? So there are now marketplaces where you can just go buy a website that's already cash producing. Not Spotify. Shopify has one. There are a number of places where people who enjoy building businesses but not running them will go build up a business selling, bath products or playing cards, have it generating money, and then they'll go put it up for sale and you can just buy it and it's already working, and they give you kind of an instruction manual like, here you go, here's how to run it. And so there's a lot. I think the idea of digital entrepreneurship scares a lot of people because it's like, well, I don't write, I'm not creative, I don't, have a photographer, or I don't do video or whatever. And it's like, that's not the only option. We chose that path because we enjoy the creative aspect, but you can very easily go acquire a website. And in the same way that acquiring a rental property would make you a somewhat expert on plumbing and HVAC and common, renter concerns.
It's too slow. I'm sorry. It's just too slow.
What's too slow?
Buy and hold real estate.
Oh,
it's great as a supplement to an already thriving portfolio, but it's slow. I mean, and I'll give examples because I know someone's listening, right? The first property that we got in 2014, I want to say cash flow was maybe a couple $100. So just call it annual profit. We're talking about $3,000, $3,600 a year. We can make that, right? We can write 2 articles. I can convince a company to write that check for a video that might take me 6 or 7 hours to do that now. You know what I mean? If that, I may not even have to do it. I could just outsource some of it and still have plenty of profit left over. And so I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm saying that those are the types of things that are available to you now. You can write a book and it could be one of the worst ebooks available and still earn $3,600 over a year and not have to deal with any of the headaches that I would have gotten for having that property. Now, granted, I don't have the added tax benefits and I don't have the benefit of, or the supposed benefit of appreciation, but I also don't have the benefit of market value tanking or having to get an umbrella policy or any other supplemental insurance coverage or just paperwork or any of those other things. And so on the internet, there are just far more fast and readily scalable ways to build wealth. And so to answer your question, if we're just blanket having a conversation and they were looking to be a landlord, I would say look at owning a website as digital real estate. Our blog is digital real estate. If I broker an agreement with a fintech company and I want to sell a banner on my site, that's renting. Just like a lease agreement. Hey, you can have this banner for X amount of months and that's what it's going to be. Or you want to have this blog post and you want to insert some ads. Hey, this is how much it's going to cost you. And when it's done, I can swap that out and sell it to somebody else. I don't got to deal with furniture or
security deposits. It's the click of a button.
You know what I mean? And there's a learning curve to that, just like there's a learning curve to wanting to be a landlord. But I think, when you look at where wealth is really being created today, it is predominantly happening in tech. And if you're totally disinterested in those things, then you should then be looking to benefit from the growth of tech as an investor. You know what I mean? Fine. So you're not tech savvy. Great. Well, then but you know that that's where it's at. Then let's talk about, how you construct a portfolio that allows you to cash in on all the great things that Tesla, PayPal, and all of these FANG and tech stocks are doing. And so, that's what I would say.
Great information. And we right now are just 100% VTSAX index fund. So
I would second guess that, man. And I know, listen, I know JL. I love JL.
I love JL, but he wasn't.
Listen, man.
Let me not talk about JL.
JL's great. We actually haven't met him. We were supposed to meet him last year at, what was that thing in Ecuador? Chautauqua. Chautauqua last year, but we didn't get a chance to meet him. I'm sure we'll meet him at some point, but he's a great guy and we love him. I love his book.
100%.
But listen, I think for the everyday investor that doesn't want to think about it, VTSAX is great. Obviously, there are other comparable index funds out there. But if you're in the sandwich generation, you got to be a little more risk averse. You got to put some hot sauce on that thing. Put some hot sauce.
You mean a little more risky?
A little more aggressive.
Risky, yes.
Put some hot sauce. Put some house on that portfolio.
Not the whole thing, but take a little percentage and see what happens. Like we have to do things differently because we have to make up for lost time.
Yeah, and it's not that different than what we tell people with their jobs, where it's like the reason why you think you're making good money is because you don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
So you gotta have this value in having something else to compare it to. It's one thing to say, wow, if I simply just had VTSAX, it went up 35% or something like that last year, 34, whatever the market did. But then you look at what
tech did, and it's like, wow.
What's a ticker? What's like a Vanguard ticker you recommend?
What is it? VT.
I think it's VTI.
VTI.
I think VTI is the same version as VTSAX.
But it's specific to you're right.
It's VGI. VGT. And so VGT.
VGT.
And then if you're looking at NASDAQ, it's QQQ.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of different versions of that. But basically tech sector stocks, obviously Fidelity has theirs, Schwab has
an
theirs.
Index of tech stocks.
They are priced accordingly because over the last 10 years, what they've done is, has been remarkable. You know what I mean? So yeah, we missed out on that boat too. We've since adjusted for that and with crypto. But again, I'm not an advisor, but I am willing to accept that risk because you just can't ignore the historical performance. If we had been riskier, more risk averse in the last couple of years, we'd be in a much better financial position than we are right now.
Risk averse is
I'm
not
sorry.
the word.
If we had been more willing to accept risk over the less risk averse, we'd be in a much better financial position than we are now.
Well, y'all done dropped some fire. And do you got any more questions?
I don't. It's been a lot of good information, good conversation.
Yes.
It's been amazing, and we really appreciate you all joining us tonight. And if you could just tell the viewers how they could follow you, or whatever ideas you want to pitch.
Yeah, so we're at rich&regular.com is our website, and then on social media we are at Rich and Regular on everything: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. And our digital series, Money on the Table, will be dropping sometime mid-July-ish. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to be alerted when that comes out. And other than that, we're in Atlanta.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey, we appreciate you all very much, and you all have a wonderful evening, and you all take care, and we'll definitely be in touch, okay?
Thank you.
Let's do it. Thank you.
Salute you all.
Take care.
All right, take care.
Bye.
All right.